All right, good morning. This is Mr. Barr. I just wanted to briefly chat with you about Reconstruction. This is the first of a series of fireside chats that we will do throughout the school year on different topics, and one of the main topic today is going to be Reconstruction, since it's our first unit. On your screen, you're going to see several slides as I talk. At the end, there's going to be usually some kind of question. FDR used fireside chats to communicate with the American people. Well, obviously, I'm not the president, and I'm not communicating with the American people, but I am communicating with you. So make sure you watch these videos, answer the questions at the end. It'll really help kind of supplement what we've learned in class. When we talk about Reconstruction, there's essentially just a couple things that we really need to talk about. There's two types of plans that are kind of floating out there. Number one was Lincoln's plan. It was called the 10% plan, and we went over this briefly in class, but just to kind of highlight it again, the idea here is that Lincoln comes into office for a second term. He's sworn in April of 1865, about a week or so before his assassination, and his plan, in his inaugural address, he uses the line, "with malice towards none and charity for all." And what that means for him is that we're not going to punish the southern states for what happened. Basically, his plan involved one big thing. When 10% of the voters in 1860 in the southern states swore an oath of loyalty to the Union, then those states could be readmitted to the Union and become a part of the United States again. Lincoln's goal with Reconstruction was reunification, not revenge. Lincoln didn't want revenge. Lincoln didn't want to punish the South. He thought that would divide the country and make the wounds of war even deeper after the Civil War. And he was probably correct in that sense. Unfortunately for him, he never really got a chance to carry it out because of his assassination. So that's Lincoln's plan. In the meantime, Lincoln gets assassinated in April of 1865 by John Wilkes Booth, the Southern sympathizer, and all that stuff. We went over all that in class. Andrew Johnson then becomes the President of the United States, the 17th President of the United States on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Johnson had a very adversarial relationship with Congress. Johnson believed philosophically that the president should be the one handling Reconstruction. Congress believed they should be handling it, and they differed on what they were going to do. Johnson wanted a version of Lincoln's plan. I don't want to punish the South, I just want to keep going. The Republican plan in Congress, though, did the opposite. They wanted to punish Southern leaders who were a part of the Confederate States of America. They would allow states back in, but only after they paid a fee and swore an oath. They focused on revenge, not reunification. They took away tax breaks. They taxed those states heavily. They prevented them from getting weapons and trade deals and things like that. So all those things happened as a result of, so that's the Republican plan. You have Lincoln's plan, which never really gets implemented, and you have the Republican plan. Now, the Republicans control Congress, and therefore that's going to dictate a lot of what President Johnson is able to get done. Let's look at the country post-Reconstruction. The economy was awful, as it usually is after a war. It was the equivalent of about 22% unemployment. That would be the equivalent today. There were that many people unemployed after the war, which makes sense. In the North, all the factories had been shifted to war production, and everybody was fighting the war. It wasn't like now where we send these 1,000-man armies there. We had massive amounts of troops fighting this war. There was nobody left to work. It's not like in World War II where when the men went away to fight, the women stepped in. In 1865, that didn't happen. Okay, so the only people that were working were out fighting, and so many of them had been killed. It took the country a long time to recover economically. In the South, African Americans aren't any better. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, at the end of the Civil War. The 14th Amendment was passed shortly after that, and they still don't have it. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment established equal protection under the law for all races. But they're not any better off. In the South, they're basically in a part of what I call slavery 2.0. They're in sharecropping. Sharecropping is the African Americans work the land, but they have to give a share of the crop to the owners in order to live there. So they don't have a choice. They can't vote. They can't do anything else. So the only choice they have is to work and give up part of their crop to the white people that own the property usually. Okay, so it's slavery 2.0. It's de facto slavery. All right, and then on top of that, you have Southern states implementing what we call Jim Crow laws. So Jim Crow laws were designed to sort of get around these amendments that were passed in the Constitution to give African Americans more rights. Southern states didn't want that, so they passed these laws to kind of get around that. For example, they said, okay, African Americans, you can go vote, but you have to pay a poll tax. You have to pass a literacy test. Well, obviously, African Americans weren't schooled. They didn't have a lot of money. Not everybody did. So they weren't going to be able to vote because of those things. Those were barriers that they put up on purpose to try to prevent them or discouraging them from voting. They had a property ownership. In order to be a citizen, you had to pay a poll tax, you had to pass a literacy test. In order to vote, you had to do the same thing. And then you had to own property. Well, none of that happened. So it was their way of saying, yeah, we'll let you vote, but there's conditions to it. So the African Americans post-Reconstruction weren't any better off than they were before. Reconstruction essentially had two goals. Number one, readmit the former Southern states back into the Union, and then unify and rebuild the country after the Civil War. My question to you is simple. Was Reconstruction a success or a failure? I'll leave it up to you. I provide, you decide. Thanks for watching.